In terms of structure, where should the focus be mostly on? Uchenna, if you can take that for me, in terms of trying to reposition, trying to do a proper structural reforms, or reform in this case now, how or who should actually be driving the structural reform?
Okay, everybody, all hands have to be on deck to make this happen. But I want to say that I think we should change what we teach and how we teach.
That's right.
I want to first commend the Minister of Education for introducing entrepreneurship as something that is now a compulsory subject for people in the secondary schools. Now, but the thing is, a good number of times we come up with very good concepts, but how we enforce and implement these things is another thing. So I would suggest that we change what we teach and how we teach. I want to borrow a leaf from somebody I think you should bring to talk about this, Alero Tobo, who has worked with the Ministry of Education at some time. We had our annual lecture. CVA run this annual lecture every year, and she was a speaker. One of the speakers at the one we had I think it was in 2011. Okay. And the topic was education, youth, and elections. We chose that topic because it was that year that the WAEC and NECO result was, I think, 2% pass at that level. So she came and she opened up a lot of things and said that for our education sector to function well and churn out producers, like I said before, we must have a system that will enforce and inculcate in the people from primary to secondary to tertiary what she called the 4 C's: the culture of discipline, the culture of honesty, the culture of production and hard work. That's for me where this entrepreneurship they have introduced comes in, and then the culture of service. So she went on to give examples of how countries like China and Malaysia and other places, when you go there, from primary school to secondary school to the university level, you see these 4 C's in every child, in every young person, every person there. So when they go into the society, when you hire somebody, the person is coming in to work for you, the person have the right work ethic. The person knows that if you're paying him for 8 hours, that 8 hours he must give value for that 8 hours. And it has to start from the nursery school, from the primary school to the tertiary. So that's, for me, what I think should be done. And it involves both the teachers, because I was coming to that part of this problem is that we have unqualified teachers.
I was just going to ask you that question.
She talked about it.
If you don't have qualified teachers, everything that you try to start to do to correct the system will not work.
Will not work.
From primary to secondary to tertiary.
Yes.
So if you don't have good teachers who are qualified, who have the prerequisite skills to inculcate in this young, fresh, fertile mind how to become producers and not hunters, then you definitely will not get the best out of the students.
And that's why I'm so happy with what the Edo State governor is doing. Bringing teachers to test them, and you see that a good number of these teachers, in what Adero also talked about, teachers were brought, and they were giving exams that people in primary 6 should be able to pass very well. And a good number of teachers who are supposed to be teaching these people couldn't pass these exams. And these are the people that we pay every day, and we expect them to churn out producers for us. Right. So we need to go back to the drawing board. What has happened to the teachers training colleges we used to have in those days? Yeah. A good number of people they call teachers today, and it's not just for primary, secondary schools. I and my brother applied wrote qualifying exam for a program in one of the universities in this country. I don't want to mention names. And the course was Masters in Public and Masters in Public and International Affairs. So my brother, afterwards, continued that program. One of the days we were talking, he said, because he had done an MBA before, but he needed this program to add to his profile.
Certificate.
Yeah. He told me that it's just so alarming. That what are they giving them there is chaff. Because a lecturer is teaching him, and you know that what the lecturer is saying is a lie and is chaff. But you know he can't just tell him that to the face. But that's what he said, is just the truth. So it's not just about unqualified teachers in the nursery school or primary, but also even in the tertiary.
So in order to get a good working education system, every aspect has to be overhauled in this value chain,
Yes. That's
right.
starting with the teachers.
That's right.
Because if the teachers are not what we expect them to be, and they're not giving out what they are expected to be given out, there's definitely no way that these students, when they come out, will be competitive enough to even compete locally, not to even mention globally. Because a lot of things are happening on the global scale, and it seems as if we're not ready for it. Take, for instance, sometimes we get these funny stories about people who are first-class holders or even 2-1 holders. When they leave our shores and go outside,
They're doing very well.
they do very well.
That's right.
Because somehow or the other, they were fortunate to have gone to have schooled at a time when things were still right, but not anymore. Right now, it still seems as if when they go out, they're not even anywhere near their peers. So, how can we now begin to address that in terms of looking at trying to forge inclusive growth and create jobs? The education system is very, very important. And we need to get our graduates ready to hit the market. How can the ICT, for instance, that's what we're talking about a lot these days.
Yeah.
Information technology drives everything. How can the ICT help in revamping the system?
You taking that?
I'm going to take that. At the center where I work, CVL, or Center for Values and Leadership, what we do there is we try to build leadership values in young people, and we partner with quite a number of organizations to work together to achieve that. What we're trying to develop now is a program that we're going to take to the universities, working with organizations like CFA Leverage, and somebody sent me something from Jumia. He works with them. They're trying to do something around the area of ICT. Now, what we plan to do is to get into the universities and see how we can work with them and use ICT to, we're targeting those in third year and final year to develop them. They understand the best way they can use ICT to, bring to life what they are learning in the universities.
Sorry to cut you here, but you know that these days, the using of the internet or understanding what the information ICT generally it's what's all about is not, in fact, it starts very early.
Yeah.
So we have very young children at a very, impressionable age who understand even more than us what ICT is all about.
Yeah.
So why don't you think about starting programs that will begin to focus on these fertile minds who are already seemingly light years away, light years ahead of us, in terms of building them to begin to, assume the leadership position which you're talking about?
Okay, thank you for that. What I think we'll do is maybe to do some kind of awareness program on that, so that NGOs, because why I mentioned the universities is we have a target audience for our programs. Our target audience runs between the age of 18 and 40. Now, because one NGO cannot change the whole of Nigeria. There are people who work with primary, secondary schools and children and all that. So those kind of NGOs should also, or organizations should also come up with how they can integrate ICT, working with ICT companies into what they are doing, taking it to the schools and all that to see how they can bring that about. But I mentioned this specifically because our main target audience are people. Most of them are in the universities. Most of them are young professionals. Most of them are young managers. So how do we affect their lives through ICT and other stuff? So that's why I mentioned that basically. But like you said, is so surprising when you see. I saw a man yesterday with his son that is like a year plus, not up to 2 years. The boy was just struggling with the father for the phone, and you could actually see him pressing stuff.
Doing things, yeah.
I'm sure that boy is not yet up to 2 years, and he was doing it very well, so engrossed in it. So you can imagine what he will be doing by the time he will be 5 years, he will be 10 years. So organizations that are working with people in this age bracket should also see how they can go into the schools and work with ICT companies to integrate information technology into any and everything that is happening in their lives.
Especially in terms of building skills. Now let's talk about funding. Funding the system has always been on the front burner. So in terms of funding the education system, what innovative ways should the public, that's the government in this case, and the private sector be looking at?
Well, like he said, CVL and other organizations who organize trainings, especially in ICT. I want to also add a few things to the ICT because I studied computer science, and throughout the period we did computer in school, I didn't know what computer looked like.
No, I think you did computer in the days of Cobalt and the rest of it. Such programs do not exist anymore.
We knew about big computers, and they tell you everything about computer. You just imagine with your limited mind what computer should be like, okay? And you graduated a computer scientist. You didn't know and you haven't seen a computer. But it was after graduation, 2 weeks, I got my hands on a system. All those things we were told in school for 4 years, I got to know them. And he said about little children now playing with computers and all. Sometimes my 8-year-old boy teaches me what I do not know in a computer. And he's still in primary school. So what you said, the funding, yes, the funding, we may not expect that funding from the government. I'm sorry to say that because, yes, good intentions, it might come. But always the problem is, does that money get to where it's been channeled to go? If it does, there will be a lot of spill-off and spin-over in terms of what we do and how we do things. I'll give you another example. I belong to a group, and we noticed that now ICT is the 21st century tool. So we decided to set up a training, which will be coming up in June. And some of the ICT companies have agreed to come. Of course, when you're teaching adults, it's different from when you're teaching people whose mind are already tuned to doing things differently. We're going to be teaching people how to use the internet, basic use of internet. Some people buy phones for 150,000, but they cannot use the basic things in the phone to make their businesses better. So more of the emphasis will be on the private sector.
Okay. Well,
on that funding, I want to say one quick thing. The UN recommendation for funding of education is that education should constitute 25% of a country's budget.
Yes, so, and then this budget, we have about 424.3 billion naira. It's actually the highest allocation for education.
Now, so that's one. The other one is now what he talked about. When this money comes, what happens to it?
Who manages it?
Who manages it?
Who gets what?
How is it done? And also private sector should also fund researches and all that in the university that is done outside of Nigeria. That's what is driving a good number of innovation that you see come out. You have phones and all that. You see companies going to Harvard, going to Stanford and MIT to fund research programs that will now lead to producing and manufacturing things. So everybody should be involved in this funding, the government, the private sector.
Well, thank you so much, Uchenna, for also chipping that in. Emeka, thank you also for coming on the program this morning. It's been an interesting conversation. Well, I've been speaking with the Vice Chairman, Proudly-Nigerian Project, Emeka Izuorah, and Uchenna Achunine. He's the Executive Director, Center for Values Leadership, and we've been looking at rethinking education to reshape the world. Well, Business Morning continues in just a moment. Our focus is still on the World Economic Forum Africa, and we're going to be focusing on what Nigerians in diaspora feel about this meeting that we'll be holding next month in the Federal Capital Territory. Please join us again for the conversation.